Welcome to our deep dive, and today we're going to explore the life of Dolores Price,
Oh, absolutely.
a really key figure in the Troubles in Northern Ireland. We'll be using the book Say Nothing, a true story of murder and memory in Northern Ireland by Patrick Radden Keefe. This deep dive, we're going to be looking at how someone's personal life gets all tangled up in political chaos and the long-lasting impact conflict can have. So what stands out to you about Dolores' childhood and how it might have shaped her path?
Well, you really have to consider that Dolores grew up immersed in stories about Irish republicanism.
Right.
Her father was an IRA veteran.
Of course.
So these ideals were deeply ingrained in her from a very young age. It's almost like she was destined for this struggle.
Yeah, but it wasn't just her father, right? Her Aunt Brady also had a major influence. Imagine growing up hearing about your aunt's involvement in an IRA bombing.
Right.
One that went terribly wrong, leaving her with severe injuries.
Yes,
And yet she had absolutely no regrets.
exactly. The book actually mentions Dolores describing her aunt's handless wrists as pussycat paws. It's a really striking and somewhat disturbing image, to be honest. This detail really drives home the depth of their bond and their unwavering commitment to the cause, even facing such incredible sacrifice. How do you think this environment shaped Dolores' worldview?
Oh, it had to have a huge impact.
It had to.
It's like growing up in a family where a particular political belief is the only truth.
Yeah.
You'd inherit this feeling of responsibility, wouldn't you?
I think so.
And then in 1969, she was part of a civil rights march that was attacked. This was a big moment for her, don't you think?
Absolutely. That march was a turning point for many, and for Dolores, too. It showed that peaceful protests were often met with violence. For someone already steeped in these narratives of resistance,
Yeah.
it could easily push them towards more drastic solutions. And it's important to grasp this context because it really lays the foundation for her later involvement with the IRA.
Okay, so now the book introduces us to Jean McConville, a widowed mother of 10,
10 kids.
living in Divis Flats. Their lives intertwine in this really tragic way.
Jean's story really demonstrates the complexities of identity during this period.
Yeah.
Her husband, Arthur, was a British Army veteran. Can you imagine the balancing act she had to maintain, raising a family in a community where anyone connected to the British Army was immediately suspect?
It's almost like something out of Shakespeare, isn't it?
It is.
These two women, Dolores and Jean, with such different lives but caught up in the same conflict.
Right?
And then in 1972, Jean is abducted from her home.
Right in front of her children.
Horrible.
The book really captures the sheer terror of that event.
Yeah.
The children watching their mother being taken, never to be seen again. It's just this chilling reminder of the human cost of conflict
Right.
and how violence extends way beyond the immediate victims.
And this disappearance became a public event.
Yes.
Even the BBC tried to find the McConville children. This kind of highlights the media's role in the conflict, right?
Absolutely.
They were shedding light on the injustices,
Right.
but at the same time, their involvement could potentially put everyone at risk.
It's such a fine line.
It is.
And it's something journalists covering these kinds of conflicts still struggle with today.
Right.
Now, at the same time, Dolores was becoming more and more active in the IRA,
Yes.
working with a clandestine unit known as the Unknowns.
Okay, I have to admit, when I first read about the unknowns, I was a little lost. Who were they? What was their role in the IRA?
Sure. So the Unknowns were a super secretive unit within the IRA.
Okay.
They were responsible for some of the most delicate and, let's be honest, often brutal operations.
Right.
They operated outside the usual IRA command structure, reporting directly to leaders like Gerry Adams. Their very existence shows how ruthless the IRA's tactics had become.
It's fascinating how the book exposes these inner workings of the IRA. We see the moral dilemmas, the internal struggles, the balancing act between fighting for their cause and resorting to violence, like the case of Joe Linsky, the mad monk, who was executed by the IRA for having an affair with a comrade's wife.
Oh, the Linsky case is a stark reminder that the IRA, even while fighting for what they saw as a just cause,
Right.
weren't above brutal internal discipline.
Right.
It really makes you question the justifications for violence, even within a movement that considers itself to be fighting for liberation.
Exactly. And then comes 1973, a pivotal year in Dolores' story.
Yes.
This is when she, along with her sister Marion, carried out the Old Bailey bombings in London. What really struck you about the book's account of this event?
The book captures this really chilling contrast between the everyday and the deadly. Dolores and Marion planned their attacks meticulously, even attending a play the night before the bombings.
Wow.
The play, The Freedom of the City, was about civil rights protesters being mistaken for terrorists, which adds this layer of eerie foreshadowing to the events that unfolded.
It's a chilling detail, the way their ordinary lives crossed paths with these acts of violence.
It is.
And of course, the bombings caused widespread chaos and fear.
Of course.
Hundreds were injured, and one man, Frederick Milton, died of a heart attack attributed to the stress of it all. This tragedy forever tied Dolores to the human cost of her actions.
Right, and the bombings thrust both Dolores and Marion into the spotlight.
Yeah.
They were arrested, put on trial, and labeled the Sisters of Terror by the media. It's another instance of how the personal and political became intertwined in their lives. What are your thoughts on this sudden shift from shadowy operatives to public figures?
It is pretty remarkable, isn't it?
It is.
They became symbols of the conflict almost overnight.
Yeah.
Their faces were everywhere.
Everywhere.
Their lives scrutinized by everyone. I can't even imagine the kind of pressure and scrutiny they faced during that trial.
Oh, the trial itself was a spectacle, really showcasing the growing involvement of women in the conflict.
Right.
And highlighting the legal and political complexities of the Troubles.
Right.
Despite maintaining their innocence, both Dolores and Marion were found guilty and sentenced to long prison terms in England.
And this is where their story takes another dramatic turn.
Yeah.
Facing harsh conditions in English prisons, they embark on hunger strikes, drawing on a long tradition of Irish resistance.
Hunger strikes were a potent form of protest, deeply embedded in Irish history.
Yeah.
Figures like Terence McSwiney, who died on hunger strike back in 1920, became martyrs for the cause. Dolores saw herself as part of this lineage of resistance, ready to endure suffering and even death for her beliefs.
The book actually quotes Dolores saying that dying in prison would be an honor, comparing it to the sacrifices of those who died fighting in the streets. It's a stark and somewhat unsettling glimpse into her mindset at that time, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, her words really revealed the depth of her conviction. She believed she was part of a greater struggle, part of a historical continuum of Irish resistance against British rule. This unwavering commitment fueled her actions, both inside and outside prison.
While Dolores and Marion were in prison, their supporters even went so far as to kidnap an elderly Irish earl and his wife, trying to secure their release.
I know.
It's a bizarre episode.
It is.
Because the hostages later described their captors as kind.
They did.
And even praised the full Irish breakfasts they were served.
I know, right?
It's this absurdly quirky detail that really highlights the unpredictable nature of the conflict.
Yeah.
This blurring of lines between violence and compassion.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even amidst brutality, moments of humanity can still emerge. What are your thoughts on this strange contrast?
It's almost funny, isn't it? These revolutionaries, capable of kidnapping and violence, but also capable of showing such unexpected kindness to their captives. I think it really speaks to the complexity of human nature, the contradictions that can exist within a single person, even someone deeply involved in such a violent struggle.
Right. People are rarely just one thing.
Never.
Especially in a conflict as nuanced and complex as the Troubles. Everyone involved, the IRA, the British soldiers, everyday citizens, they were all navigating a moral minefield.
Absolutely.
Eventually, Dolores was released from prison on humanitarian grounds due to failing health after years of hunger striking.
Right.
This marked a big turning point for her.
It did.
Upon returning to Ireland, she married the renowned actor Stephen Rea.
That marriage was such a fascinating blend of art and politics.
It was.
Rea often played roles sympathetic to the IRA.
Right.
So his relationship with Dolores brought a very unique dynamic. It really blurred the lines between performance and reality, don't you think?
It's an amazing turn of events.
It is.
This former IRA operative, who had been part of bombings and hunger strikes, now married to an actor known for his nuanced portrayals of people caught in the conflict.
Exactly.
It speaks to how unpredictable life can be,
It is.
especially in a place as turbulent as Northern Ireland.
Absolutely. It also demonstrates the power of human connection, the capacity to find love and support, even after enduring such immense hardship. But even with this newfound stability, Dolores still had to wrestle with her past.
Exactly. The book talks about her growing disillusionment, her battles with alcoholism, her strained relationship with her former comrade, Brendan Hughes, who himself was struggling and questioning the peace process.
Hughes's disillusionment is a really crucial part of the story. He felt the peace process had betrayed everything he'd fought for.
Yeah.
And his struggles with alcoholism and depression show the enduring psychological impact of the conflict, even for those who survived.
The book then goes into this fascinating, controversial project undertaken by Boston College.
Oh, yes.
They interviewed former IRA members, including Brendan Hughes, about their experiences, promising confidentiality until after their deaths. What are your thoughts on this project, knowing it could potentially uncover very sensitive information?
Well, the Boston College Project was incredibly valuable, giving historians firsthand accounts from those involved in the conflict.
Right.
But it also raised some serious ethical and legal concerns about confidentiality and the potential consequences of truth-telling in a society still healing from a very painful past.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on that dilemma?
It's a tough one, isn't it?
It is.
You have the potential to uncover really important information about this crucial period.
Right.
On the other hand, there are the ethical considerations of confidentiality
Of course.
and the risk of reopening old wounds or even putting people in danger. It's a delicate balancing act, one that the researchers involved really had to grapple with.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that history is rarely clean and straightforward.
Right.
It's messy,
Messy.
complicated,
It is.
and often full of ethical challenges.
Right.
But understanding these complexities is vital if we want to learn from the past and build a better future.
Absolutely. And talking about learning from the past, Brendan Hughes dropped a bombshell in his interview.
He did.
Claiming that Jerry Adams ordered the disappearance of Jean McConville. This completely changes our understanding of Adams's role, doesn't it?
It does. It raises some serious questions about leadership,
Yeah,
about the compromises made in the name of peace,
right.
and about the secrets that can linger long after a conflict officially ends.
And the book says Hughes, carrying this burden of knowledge, sought refuge in Divis Tower.
Yes.
It really highlights how the past continued to torment him, even as he was trying to move on.
Hughes's anxiety and his retreat to Divis Tower are really powerful symbols of the psychological scars left by the conflict.
Right.
It shows us that peace doesn't erase the trauma, the guilt, or the lingering fear that can stay with you long after the violence stops.
His revelation triggered a new investigation by the Police Service of Northern Ireland, leading to the arrest of Ivor Bell,
Right.
a veteran Republican who was at the meeting where Jean McConville's fate was decided.
That's right.
Bell, though, was later deemed unfit for trial due to dementia.
The book reviews the chilling details of that meeting. The debates within the IRA about what to do with Jean McConville, who they suspected was an informer.
Right.
Hughes's account implicates Adams in the decision to disappear her, a tactic that became one of the most controversial aspects of the entire conflict.
And Ivor Bell is the same person who actually advocated for killing Jean and leaving her body to be found instead of making her disappear.
I know, right?
As a more humane approach.
It's a disturbing detail that reveals the twisted moral logic within the IRA.
It does.
Even those arguing for a more humane approach were still advocating for executing a woman based purely on suspicion, without a trial. It shows the brutal reality of the conflict and the impossible choices people were forced to make.
So, where does all of this leave us? We follow Dolores from a childhood steeped in republicanism to her IRA involvement, the London bombings, imprisonment, hunger strikes, her marriage to Stephen Rea, and her complicated relationship with the peace process. Now we have this shocking revelation about Jean McConville's disappearance, implicating Jerry Adams, a man who would later become a key figure in bringing peace to Northern Ireland.
It's a testament to the enduring legacy of the Troubles.
It is.
The way personal lives and politics get intertwined and the lasting power of secrets, but there's still so much more to unravel.
That's right. And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of this deep dive.
IRA.
We'll delve deeper into the mystery of Jean McConville's disappearance and the ongoing search for answers. So stay tuned.
You know, it's really amazing how Say Nothing delves into the whole murky world of intelligence gathering during the Troubles. Jean McConville's story especially, you see how whispers and rumors could have deadly consequences.
It's hard to believe that someone's life could be on the line based on just flimsy rumors. The book says that Jean was suspected of being an informer for supposedly helping a wounded British soldier. I mean, that's not exactly hard evidence, is it?
It really shows the atmosphere of fear and paranoia that had taken over Belfast. In the eyes of the IRA, even the slightest hint of working with the enemy was enough to make someone suspicious. And sadly, for Jean, it ended tragically.
Yeah, the book says she was taken over the border to the Republic of Ireland, interrogated, tortured, and then executed by an IRA unit. It's a horrifying thought, to be taken from your home and treated so brutally, all because of unfounded accusations.
It really shows the dark side of this conflict, the dehumanization that happens when ideologies clash and fear takes over. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Many people disappeared during the Troubles, and their families never knew what happened to them for years.
Right. The book also mentions that Dolores Price, in those conversations she had with Ed Maloney and Anthony McIntyre that weren't officially recorded, she talked about Jean's execution. She said a three-person unit was involved in Jean's death. We know she was there, and so is Pat McClure, the head of the Unknowns. But the third person, the one who actually shot Jean, is never named.
That's a chilling detail. It adds another layer of mystery to this story. Who was this person? What was their role in the IRA? And why haven't they said anything all these years?
And it gets even more interesting because this unnamed person ended up working as Jerry Adams' driver. It's a pretty shocking twist.
It is. It suggests someone closely involved in one of the most controversial things that happened during the Troubles was then allowed to be close to a man who became a symbol of peace and reconciliation. It really makes you think about power, the secrets people keep, and the things we compromise on for the sake of peace.
Before we get too deep into this whole mystery of the unnamed shooter, I want to go back to 1972 for a second. The book describes it as a particularly violent time in Belfast, with things escalating on both sides. Jean McConville's husband, Arthur, was a British Army veteran, which adds another layer of complexity.
Oh, yeah. That detail about Arthur's background is really important. It shows how complicated identities were during the Troubles. A Catholic woman married to a British Army veteran would have been viewed with suspicion by both sides. It's a tragic example of how people could get caught in the crossfire. Their loyalties were questioned, their lives turned upside down by forces beyond their control.
Right, and in this environment filled with suspicion and fear, the IRA was becoming more and more ruthless with their bombings and shootings. Dolores Price, now a seasoned operative, was right in the thick of it.
The book does a great job of showing how Dolores went from a young, idealistic person to a hardened IRA soldier. You see how violence can change even people with good intentions. It can twist their morals and make them do things they never thought possible.
One part that really stuck with me was when Dolores drove a car bomb through Belfast. It's hard to imagine the mental and emotional toll of doing something like that, knowing your actions could lead to innocent people dying.
It shows the level of dedication, or maybe desperation, within the IRA at the time. They really believed they were fighting a war against oppression, and those violent acts were justified in their minds. It's a tough thing to wrap your head around, especially if you haven't experienced that kind of conflict firsthand.
And it's important to remember that not everyone in the IRA was on board with these tactics. The book talks about some of the internal arguments and disagreements within the organization. It shows how morally complex the whole struggle really was. For example, there's a section about Frank Kitson, a British Army officer known for his controversial counterinsurgency tactics.
Yeah, Kitson was a major figure in developing strategies to fight guerrilla warfare. His methods, which he developed while in Kenya fighting the Mau Mau rebellion, were pretty brutal and morally questionable. He believed in going undercover within rebel groups, using lies and psychological warfare to turn members against each other.
His approach, which he called targeting the water where the fish swim, aimed to break down the social bonds within a community. He saw this as a way to weaken the IRA's support and ultimately defeat them.
Kitson's tactics bring up important questions about the ethics of counterinsurgency. Can a democratic country really use methods that chip away at civil liberties and potentially violate human rights, even for the sake of security?
Yeah.
It's a debate that's still going on today as governments struggle with fighting terrorism and insurgencies.
In 1971, they actually put Kitson's ideas into action with internment. They arrested hundreds of suspected IRA members and held them without a trial. This move just made things worse and alienated a lot of Catholics who felt like they were being unfairly targeted.
Internment was a huge turning point. It completely backfired. It pushed more people toward the IRA and fueled the cycle of violence. It's a perfect example of how using force and strong-arm tactics can make a conflict worse instead of better.
With all this going on, Jean McConville's disappearance becomes even more disturbing. Was she really an informer, like the IRA claimed? Or was she just an innocent woman caught in the middle of a brutal war?
The book doesn't give a clear answer, but it does shed light on how messed up the IRA's intelligence gathering was. Rumors and suspicions were taken as facts. And in Jean McConville's case, a story about her helping a wounded British soldier was enough to seal her fate.
It breaks your heart to think something so small could lead to such a horrible outcome. The book says Jean was taken across the border, interrogated, tortured, and ultimately executed by an IRA unit.
The details of her execution are chilling. Dolores Price, in those off-the-record talks with Ed Maloney and Anthony McIntyre, talked about 3 people being involved in Jean's death. We know that she and Pat McClure, the commander of the Unknowns, were there. But the third person, the one who actually pulled the trigger, is still a mystery.
And like we said before, this unnamed person ended up as Jerry Adams' driver. It's a crazy twist that raises so many questions about power, the secrets we keep, and the compromises we make for peace.
It reminds us that history is often told by the winners, and that even when a conflict is over, the truth can be really hard to find. It can be buried under denial, self-preservation, and political maneuvering.
Makes you wonder how many more stories like Jean McConville's are out there, hidden in the shadows of the Troubles.
It's a question a lot of people in Northern Ireland still think about. And Say Nothing really acknowledges that feeling. Like, the book talks about organizations like the Independent Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains. They're still working hard to find the people who disappeared.
It shows you how much the families want closure, right? To be able to bury their loved ones and finally get some peace. But the book makes it clear, finding justice isn't easy.
No, not at all. There's this deep culture of silence around the Troubles. People who are involved on both sides, they don't want to talk. Maybe they're scared. Maybe they just want to move on. It makes uncovering the truth and holding people accountable really, really tough.
Dolores Price's life after prison is kind of a fascinating example of trying to move forward while carrying the weight of the past. I mean, she did find some stability with her marriage to Stephen Rea. She had a new family.
Yeah, and their relationship says a lot about forgiveness and understanding. Rea, a pacifist, fell in love with a woman who was deeply involved in violence. It must have been a delicate balance, trying to live a normal life with such different pasts.
But as we know from the book, Dolores couldn't escape the trauma of what she went through, both in the IRA and in prison. She struggled with alcohol, depression, and her marriage to Rea eventually fell apart.
It just goes to show how conflict can have long-lasting psychological effects. The memories, the guilt, the nightmares, they don't just disappear when the fighting stops.
Even with the peace process, Dolores became more and more critical of Jerry Adams and Sinn Féin. She felt like they had given up too much, that they betrayed the ideals of the Republican movement.
This feeling of disillusionment was shared by a lot of Republicans at the time. Some felt like the arms struggle ended too soon, and the dream of a united Ireland was slipping away.
And that's why Dolores' decision to break the silence about Jean McConville's disappearance is so important. She knew there would be consequences, but she felt she had to tell the truth, to challenge the story Sinn Féin was telling.
It was a brave move, driven by a sense of moral duty. She knew she'd be ostracized by her former comrades, but she couldn't stay quiet anymore.
And the reaction was harsh, as you might imagine. Some people called her a liar, some said she was just a bitter woman out for revenge.
It's ironic that someone who gave her life to the Republican cause ended up being rejected by the very movement she fought for. It shows you how unforgiving political ideologies can be, how loyalty can sometimes be more important than the truth.
Dolores Price died in 2013, leaving behind a complex and controversial legacy. She was a fighter, a true believer in the cause, but also someone deeply affected by the violence she both witnessed and participated in.
Her story really captures the moral gray areas of the Troubles. There weren't any easy answers, no clear-cut good guys or bad guys. People had to make impossible decisions, and the consequences of those choices often lasted for decades.
Say Nothing is a captivating look at a really turbulent time in history. It dives into the personal stories of people like Dolores Price and Jean McConville, whose lives were forever linked by the conflict.
The book makes us think about some uncomfortable truths, to acknowledge how complicated the past is, and to deal with the lasting impact of violence and division. It reminds us that peace is fragile, hard to achieve, and easily broken.
It also raises some important questions about truth and reconciliation. Can a society truly heal if the whole story isn't told? And can people ever truly escape their past? These are questions that stay with you long after you've finished the book.
And they're questions that are still relevant in Northern Ireland today. The Troubles might be over, but you can still feel their impact in Belfast, in the lives of the people who lived through them. It shows us that the past never really goes away, and finding understanding and healing is a continuous journey.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Say Nothing, exploring the life of Dolores Price against the backdrop of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. We encourage you to seek out this book and learn more about the individuals caught in the web of this conflict and how their lives intertwined with the political upheaval of the time.
It's been a fascinating discussion. Thanks for having me.